Hi, and welcome to Week 3, Lesson 14 for Grade 12 ELA. I am going to walk you through our distance learning for today. Let's start with a quick riddle. What is so fragile that saying its name breaks it? I'll read it one more time. What is so fragile that saying its name breaks it? If you need a little bit more time to think about this one, pause the video because I'm about to show you the answer. Silence. If you say its name, if you say silence, you're breaking the silence. Okay, so hopefully that got your wheels spinning in your brain a little bit, and we can get started now with our lesson. We are going to continue our study today of our essay that we're reading, Back to My Own Country. And we are on lesson 14, which is on page 49 of your learning packet. And you'll also need your note catcher today on page 50, and of course something to write with. The pages that we're focusing on today are pages 38 and 39 in your learning packet. Here is our learning target for today. Let's read it together. I can analyze a text to determine how the author feels about key concepts and ideas. So we have completed our first reading of the essay, and as we were reading, we went back and we closely analyzed some of the paragraphs as we were going along throughout the lessons. And today we're going to go back again and spend some more time on 3 paragraphs in particular. And the guiding questions that we want to keep in mind today and for the rest of our study with this text are: how did British colonialism complicate the idea of home? And what does it mean to call a place home? Okay, so just remember to think about those as we're doing our close reading today. Before we start our reading, or rereading really, of some of the paragraphs in this text, I'd like you to first look over the lesson on page 49 of your packet and read the questions in the think, talk, and write sections of the lesson. So you'll see some questions written there on the lesson plan. So go ahead and read those questions because that's going to give you your purpose for reading today. It's going to tell you what to focus on as you go back and do your rereadings of the lesson, of the text rather. So take some time now, about a minute, to look over your lesson plan and read the questions in the think, talk, and write sections. Now that you have an idea of what you will be focusing on today and what's coming up in the lesson, we'll do our actual reading. So here you'll be rereading 3 paragraphs, paragraphs 23, 29, and 32. And in paragraphs 29 and 32, you'll be marking the phrases that show how Britain views the Caribbean and its history with the area. Marking the words and the phrases that show how Britain views the Caribbean and its history with that area. So go ahead and pause to do that now. Okay, now that you've had a chance to do some annotating on your own, I'll show you something that I annotated. This is the very start of paragraph 32, and I've underlined this first sentence here, which says, apart from being an exotic holiday destination, the islands have now become an irrelevance here. So if you remember, I was supposed to underline the parts that show how Britain views the Caribbean and its history with the area. And I'm seeing here that Britain is viewing the Caribbean as being irrelevant, is the word that the author uses here. And I made a note to myself in the margin: after everything that Britain did during the colonial era in the Caribbean and the legacy that they left there, modern day Britain doesn't even think about that world, that part of the world, with importance. So I just jotted that note down to myself. There were other examples in those two paragraphs that you might have pulled out as well and underlined and made some notes in the margins, and that's good. But this was just one example that I wanted to show you. Now we'll move on to our thinking. And for this part, you'll be thinking about the following question. What evidence does the author include to show the reader that Britain thinks the Caribbean islands and their history with Britain are irrelevant? So remember, I just showed you the part in the text where the author mentions the irrelevance. And so now you're going to go back and pull out and think about some of that evidence that the author is including to show the reader that Britain thinks the Caribbean islands and the history there are irrelevant. And before you do your thinking on your own, I'll model this for you first. So what I did is I went back to my text and I went back to paragraph 29 actually, and I noticed that in my rereading I had underlined these sentences here that I'll read aloud to you now. I had one lesson on the transatlantic slave trade. We looked at illustrations of slaves and ships, but that was all. I learned much more about William Wilberforce and the campaign for the abolition of slavery than anything about the life of a slave. We know more about slavery in the American South than in the British Caribbean. And as I read that section, I noticed, I wrote this down in the margin as well, that the American slave trade is emphasized more than the British Caribbean slave trade. And British students don't learn about the differences between these two societies. So this was the evidence that I pulled out to support my thinking of the question for the thinking part of the lesson. Now it's your turn to do that. Go back, look at the evidence you pulled out, and think about your answer. You can pause the video to do that now. Now that you've thought about that, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're switching to looking at paragraph 23, which is the other paragraph that you reread today. And for this paragraph, with your family member, caregiver, or friend, I'd like you to talk about the following question. Why does the author describe her trip to Jamaica as an amazing experience? So you may have underlined some details there on your first reading maybe, or in the closed reading that we did previously. So go back, look at your annotations that you've made over the course of the past few lessons and over the course of today as well, and talk about this question. Why does the author describe her trip to Jamaica as an amazing experience? Go ahead and have that conversation now. And welcome back. Now that you've finished your discussion with your family member, caregiver, or friend, it's time to finish with our writing for today. And today you'll be answering two questions on your note catcher. The first one on top is about comparing some of the sentiments in the two paragraphs. So you're going to answer this question. How does the author's sentiment in paragraph 23 compare with the feeling conveyed in paragraphs 29 and 32? So if you remember in paragraph 23, the author was talking about her amazing trip to Jamaica and how that made her feel, being connected with her family and what that did and how that informed her, some of her identity. In paragraphs 29 and 32, the tone shifted a little bit, and we're talking about how students in Britain learn about British history and the difference between Britain and America, how those two countries teach the history of slavery to their students, and also how Britain views the Caribbean now. So two very different sentiments there. So take a little time to write down how the sentiment changes between those paragraphs or those sections of the text. And the next question you're going to answer, you're going to write a little bit more there. You're going to write about 5 to 7 sentences, and you're going to answer this question here. How was the author's sense of home influenced by social issues, the passage of time, and historical events? Provide specific details and evidence from the text. So here you'll go through and you will probably be pulling out some of your details from paragraphs 23, 29, and 32 that you read today, but you may also want to use evidence that you pulled out in your prior readings, and that's fine too. So now you'll take some time to do your writing. And after you do your writing, I'd like you to share what you've written with somebody and then relate it back to the essential question of the unit. What does it mean to call a place home? And before I send you off to do your writing, I just want to preview for you what's coming next. So we are going to spend a little bit more time analyzing this text because it was such a long one for us. So in our next lesson, we're going to review some of the key vocabulary that we encountered during our reading. And after you do your writing, don't forget to share that with someone and talk to someone about your lesson. Also, please don't forget to read for 20 minutes and complete a reading log entry in the front of your packet. And then finally, practice your reading fluency using the first or second page of your weekly reading. So now I'll give you time to go ahead and finish up your lesson, finish up your writing and your sharing, and I look forward to teaching you again soon. Thank you.